My name is Ava. I'm 31 years old, and I walked into that gallery expecting to feel proud. I dressed with restraint, hair pulled back, black wool coat, no lipstick, no perfume. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, even though trying too hard has been my trademark since I was 11. The opening was loud, white wine in cheap glasses, everyone standing under two bright lights, pretending they weren't squinting. I hovered near the door, a stupid habit from high school art fairs. Back then, I stood near the exit just in case my father showed up. He never did, but shame, always did. It had a way of finding me. Tonight was supposed to be different, because tonight I was finally showing something, a piece I'd made in silence, alone in my crumbling studio apartment, hands frozen in winter, heater broken, ramen again. They wouldn't know that. They'd just see the canvas, the colour, the texture, the name on the wall. My name. But that's not what they noticed first. It was Jenna's laugh, from across the room, shrill, like glass cracking. Eva, is that you, God? You haven't changed. Her eyes flicked down to my boots, not in admiration. She was standing with my cousin Talia, who once told me painting was a cute phase, right before posting my work to mock it on her Instagram stories. You still doing your little art projects? She asked now, smiling with her teeth, but not her eyes. My hand twitched toward the wine tray. I missed it. I felt 12 again, knees knocking behind an easel, hoping they wouldn't see how red my hands were from scrubbing toilets to afford charcoal. I'm in the show, I said softly. Jenna's brows lifted. Really? Oh, that's nice. I knew what she meant. Nice, the way you say it about a child's drawing taped to a fridge. I turned away, toward the paintings, toward mine. But it wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I walked quickly now, past ceramic bowls, messy abstracts, gilded frames, until I saw it, in the back hallway, the piece I'd spent 6 months painting, titled Inheritance, hung in a dim corridor between the bathrooms and the janitor closet. I blinked. No nameplate, no spotlight, no wine-drunk chatter orbiting it. Just the buzz of a flickering ceiling light and a trash bin wheezing open nearby. Someone behind me murmured, "Oh, I think they just put student work back there." Student? I swallowed something that wanted to rise. I looked down at my hands, dry paint still in my nail beds. No one had noticed. I didn't belong here, but I remembered why I came. I looked for her, Eloise, the gallery owner. She wore navy-like armour and always smelled like lilac and turpentine. When I found her, she was laughing with someone tall and blonde and predictably insufferable. I waited, patient, polite, until she noticed me. "Eva," she said, her voice soft. I smiled, too eagerly. She touched my arm like someone calming a nervous child. "I meant to move your piece earlier. We had to make some curatorial decisions. You understand?" I nodded. Of course I did. I understood everything. I always had. I left early. No goodbyes. Just the sound of my boots on the marble steps and the bitter cold wrapping around me like a second rejection. I should have cried, but I didn't. I walked 3 blocks to the diner where I used to wait tables, sat in the last booth, ordered coffee I couldn't afford, watched the rain hit the window like it had something to prove. I thought of what I'd sacrificed. 3 relationships, a job offer in marketing, every family dinner since 2019, and for what? To hang in the shadows like a mistake someone forgot to erase. I took out my sketchbook, not to draw, just to hold it, to remember why I started. On the second page was a note, faded, smudged with graphite, from my mother, "Make them see you." She'd written it before she died, before the cancer, before the silence from my aunts, before the gallery that promised visibility and gave me invisibility instead. The coffee went cold, but I didn't move. I was no longer crying. I was planning. The next morning, I didn't go to work or to the studio. I went home, peeled off the coat I'd worn to the gallery, and tossed it over a chair like it offended me. Then I sat on the floor, cross-legged, surrounded by tubes of oil paint, scattered sketches, and one withered potted plant that hadn't bloomed since spring. I stared at the mess and realised something. I wasn't angry they'd mocked me. I was angry I gave them the chance. Every smile, every hopeful email, every RSVP to a show that never once took me seriously. It was all fuel for their amusement. I reached under my bed and pulled out the old box labelled "No," rejection letters, competition losses, jury comments that called my work sincere but amateur. It was my museum of failures. Some people would have burned it by now, but I kept it like scripture. Not because I believed it, but because I didn't want to forget the world I was building in spite of. As I unfolded the latest letter from a private collector who passed on my piece without a reason, something inside me snapped into alignment. Maybe it wasn't about being seen. Maybe it was about seeing myself, clearly, brutally, truthfully, and then making others look, too. Not ask, not accept. Look. I opened my laptop and stared at the blinking cursor in the search bar. Independent artist grants, crowd-funded solo exhibitions, how to open your own gallery. I didn't even know what I was looking for. But I wasn't going to wait for someone to hang me on the right wall anymore. A few nights later, I went to a different gallery, one I used to temp at in my early 20s. Not to show anything, just to watch. Observe who came, who spoke, who was ignored. The room buzzed with names, not artists, but collectors. Real estate developers pretending to understand brushwork. A woman in a blood-red coat discussing value per square inch. I noticed her because of the coat, and the silence that fell around her. That's when I saw him. Gabriel Train, the gallery's silent partner, known for acquiring struggling art spaces and flipping them into minimalist cafes or investment showrooms. He'd once turned a century-old printmaking studio into a Pilates franchise. I should have hated him, but instead, I walked up, calm, steady, introduced myself. "Eva Dalton," I said, extending my hand. He looked at me as if trying to place a memory. He wouldn't find one. "I know your name," he said after a pause. "You don't," I replied, then smiled. "But you will." He laughed, curious. "You've got confidence," he said. "No," I said, still smiling. "I've got work." The conversation that followed was quiet, purposeful. He asked what I was looking for. I told him the truth. A space. Not for art to be sold. For art to be believed in. He raised an eyebrow. I handed him my card. It was simple, just my name, number, and a link to my portfolio. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Dalton," he said. "Let's talk space." The building was a wreck. Abandoned print shop on the east edge of the city. Windows cracked, roof leaking. The walls smelled like mildew and rust. But the light, oh, the light poured in through the broken glass like it had been waiting for paint. He handed me a contract. I read every line. He wasn't offering charity. He wanted partnership, Percentage of sales. Flexible lease. I countered, firmly. He smirked, but agreed. I signed, hands trembling. I didn't tell anyone. Not Jenna. Not Talia. Not even the friends who used to repost my art with ironic emojis. I spent the next 6 months scrubbing floors, patching drywall, dragging second-hand furniture in by myself. Hung every piece with my own hands, wrote the artist statements, designed the lighting, labelled the wine, and when the launch date came, I sent invitations, even to them, especially to them. The invitations were subtle. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, no desperate tone, just a date, a time, and a name. The Inheritance Gallery. No grand declarations. No hint that the space they once dismissed me in had become something that carried my fingerprints on every brick. I mailed them out quietly, with no expectations. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd finally stopped begging for attention. The night of the launch, I arrived early, before the caterers, before the florist, before anyone else had a chance to comment on whether the lighting was too warm or too cold. I stood in the centre of the gallery, barefoot, the polished concrete cool under my feet, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing inside a room that didn't ask me to shrink. The walls were full, not just of my work, but of pieces from women like me, artists who were passed over, silenced, softened. Each piece had a story, and not one of them was hidden near the bathroom. I wore a navy dress, simple, structured, my mother's pendant around my neck. It hummed against my skin like it knew the weight of tonight. By 7 o'clock, the gallery was full, and I mean full. I watched from behind the check-in table as the very people who used to call my work too emotional, too raw, too messy now leaned into the canvases like they were trying to breathe them in. Then I saw her. Jenna, in a fur-lined jacket and heels too high for concrete, clutching a glass of wine and looking around like she expected to see someone she could outshine. Behind her, predictably, came Talia. I could smell her perfume before she even spoke. They didn't see me at first. That was fine. I didn't need to be the first thing they saw. I wanted the work to speak first. They walked from wall to wall, slower now, not mocking, just quiet. And I watched it hit them. The realization that every brushstroke, every gallery tag, every centerpiece and sculpture in this space existed because of me. Then came the moment. Eloise, yes, that Eloise, the one who hung me in the dark corridor. She arrived late, of course, like a queen entering a room she thought she still owned. But this wasn't her court anymore. She paused by one of my newer pieces, a triptych titled Muted Applause. 3 frames of rising hands, increasingly blurred. I saw her read the label, then read it again. Then she turned. Our eyes met. I smiled. A simple, level smile. No malice, just knowing. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Gabriel stepped beside me. "Boss," he said, handing me a glass of wine. "They're asking if you'll give a few words." I turned to him slowly. "Did you just call me?" He smiled. "You earned it." And there it was. The moment everything changed. I stepped onto the small platform we'd set up near the back. Not a stage, just a slightly raised block, so I could see everyone. The room quieted, not because I shouted, but because I didn't have to. "I won't keep you long." I began. "I just want to say thank you to every artist who trusted me with their work, to every person who ever created something even when they weren't sure anyone would care. and to those who laughed, who dismissed, who asked what the point was. Thank you, too. A pause, because without you, I might have waited another 10 years to realise I never needed permission to be visible. Silence, the kind that isn't awkward, but heavy, sacred. I stepped down. No applause, just quiet stares, which was better. Applause fades, but silence. That kind of silence stays with people. Jenna found me later, near the sculpture installation. This place is... wow, she said. I nodded. Thanks. I didn't realise you were... I tilted my head. In charge, I offered. She hesitated. Yes. I just smiled. Neither did I. I said, until no one else showed up to do it. They didn't leave right away. Jenna lingered like she was looking for the right moment to rewrite history. Talia wandered through the exhibit again. Slower this time. Her phone conspicuously away. That told me everything. She wasn't there to mock. Not anymore. She was there to remember. Or maybe to forget the way she used to laugh when I brought my sketch pad to family dinners. I didn't approach them again. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to explain. The walls spoke for me now. Every canvas held a story they didn't ask for, didn't care to hear when it mattered. But now they stood in the middle of my truth, like guests in a house they didn't build. Later that night, long after the last flute of champagne had been emptied, I walked through the gallery alone. The lights were dimmed. The city beyond the windows was soft and blurred like one of my early watercolours. I stopped in front of the piece that had started it all, Inheritance, the one Eloise had banished to the hallway. Now, it hung in the front room, its texture deep, its colours like bruises healing in slow motion. It had always been too emotional, too raw, too messy. It had also been right. I thought about the day I painted it. My fingers were numb. My rent was overdue. I had 2 emails in my inbox that began with unfortunately, and I painted through all of it. Not for them, not even for me. For the silence I carried. For the version of myself that didn't know if she was allowed to speak. A knock came at the gallery door. I turned, expecting it to be a straggler. But it was Eloise, alone, without her usual entourage of junior curators and curated compliments. I opened the door halfway. She looked unsure. A tight clutch held under her arm like it might shield her from judgment. I didn't get to say anything earlier, she said quietly. You don't have to, I replied. She hesitated. But I want to... I stepped back, let her in. Not because I owed her grace, but because grace given freely is a power no one can fake. She walked slowly through the room, pausing by muted applause. Then the sculpture by Nadia, the one I fought to include, even though the piece was jagged and unfinished in places. I was wrong, she said finally, stopping in front of me. About you. About what this kind of work means. I studied her face. She wasn't performing. There was no one here to impress. You weren't wrong, I said. You just didn't care to be right. A silence fell between us. Not cruel, not even cold, just final. She nodded once. This place, it matters. I nodded back. Yes, it does. Then she left. No dramatic exit, no apology, just footsteps echoing against concrete and glass. After she was gone, I locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood in the dark with my work glowing faintly from the moonlight. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly, but I felt solid, like I was finally standing in the version of my life I had only ever drawn in the corners of notebooks. There was no audience, no applause, just me, and that was enough. For the first time in years, I went home without replaying a single conversation in my head. I slept deeply, and the next morning, I woke up not asking, will they like it? But instead, what do I want to say next? That's when I knew this wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. The days that followed felt surreal, not because everything changed, but because everything stayed quiet. No dramatic messages, no confessions from old classmates or redemptive calls from family. Just silence. The kind that finally feels like peace, not punishment. I opened the gallery every morning at 9, swept the floors myself, rearranged the displays depending on the light, the mood, the week. I didn't outsource that part. It mattered too much. The curation wasn't just about beauty, it was about voice. More artists came. Some I knew, some I didn't. One was a girl named Aria, just 19, hands shaking as she showed me 3 abstract portraits on recycled canvas. She apologised for how rough they were, for not having a degree, for not knowing how to talk art. I told her what no one told me. You don't have to speak perfectly to say something true. She cried, quietly, then laughed through her tears and said she hadn't picked up a paintbrush in 8 months. Her work opened the following month. It was raw, unfiltered. People stood in front of it for a long time, longer than they did for mine. And I loved that. I needed that. But of course, not everyone changed. A week after Aria's opening, I got a message from my father. A rare occurrence. We hadn't spoken since the last Thanksgiving I bothered to show up for. The one where he told me that art wasn't a career, just a delay. The message was short. Saw something about the gallery. Congrats. Your mother would have been proud. I stared at it. Read it again. Tried to decide if it was kind or manipulative, and then I realised it didn't matter, because he hadn't come to the show. He hadn't called. He hadn't asked how I survived when the heat went out and the canvas tore and the world laughed. He was just showing up now. For the credits. Still. I replied, she already was. You just never saw it. I left it at that. The gallery became more than a space. It became a rhythm. Artists bringing in stories stitched in acrylic. Visitors leaving sticky notes on the wall with things like, this piece reminded me I'm allowed to feel, or I didn't know anyone else had been through this. It was working. It was real. Then, one afternoon, Gabriel called. He rarely did. We mostly emailed. Got someone you should meet. He said, investor, quiet type, interested in expanding the model. My throat tightened. You mean franchising? No, he said. I mean amplifying. You'd still run it. You'd have control. But we could give other artists in other cities this kind of chance. I didn't say yes. Not immediately. I told him I needed to think. That night, I went back to the old neighbourhood, the apartment where I used to cry into paper towels because I couldn't afford tissues, the alley where I once painted with leftover house paint, just to remember what colour felt like. I stood outside the old diner, the one with the flickering sign, the booth in the back where I first decided not to quit. The server at the counter looked about 19, maybe younger. She didn't know me. That was good. I sat in my old booth and ordered coffee. Black. I took out my sketchbook, a new one, thick with pages I hadn't filled yet. I wrote one word on the first page. Again. Because that's what this was. A beginning, not a finish line. The next morning, I met with the investor, a woman named Noelle. Sharp eyes, soft voice. She didn't talk numbers first. She asked about Aria, about how I chose the name Inheritance, about what I wanted to do if the gallery had unlimited resources. I want to show what everyone else hides. I said, I want to hang trauma next to triumph. I want people to walk in ashamed and walk out seen. She nodded. We can work with that. 3 months later, we signed the deal. Not a sellout. A scale-up. A way to reach artists like me who are still waiting for permission. The night the second location opened, in a converted warehouse across the country, I stood in the middle of a room I hadn't touched with my own hands. And yet, it felt like mine. Because someone else was stepping into the light, holding a brush, telling their truth. And, for the first time, I wasn't the only voice in the room. I was just the echo that made space for others. I didn't expect to become anyone's mentor. That wasn't the plan. I didn't grow up dreaming of leadership. I grew up dreaming of being enough, being heard. But somehow, when the gallery's second location started thriving, when submissions tripled, when schools began bringing students on field trips, when former hobby artists emailed us saying our walls made them pick up a brush again, I realised something maybe being seen isn't the final goal. Maybe seeing others is... It started small. I'd stay after openings, talk to the shy ones, the ones who stood near the exits like I used to, the ones who didn't speak until everyone left. They'd pull out phones with blurry photos of sketches, or crumpled portfolios with corners bent from fear, and I'd sit with them, listen, nod, not critique, not fix, just witness. Sometimes that was enough. Other times it wasn't. Like with Cam, mid-30s, former graphic designer, 2 kids, recently divorced. He brought me 3 digital pieces on a thumb drive. They were haunting, sharp-edged silhouettes layered with fragments of text and distorted faces. When I asked what they were about, he looked down and said, "What I couldn't say in court?" We sat in silence for a minute. Then I said, "Let's hang them." He blinked. "But they're not. They're digital. And raw. Not polished." I smiled. Exactly. Cam's show opened on a rainy Thursday. Only 20 people came. He told me afterward it felt like a cathedral. Quiet. Reverent. He said he'd never felt so heard. That became the bar. Not sales. Not headlines. Stillness. If people could stand in front of a piece and forget the noise of their life for one full breath, it meant something. Of course, there were critics. There always are. A reviewer from an arts magazine once wrote, "Inheritance Gallery leans too heavily on the emotional and not enough on the intellectual." I framed it. Hung it in the staff bathroom. Labelled it compliment in disguise. Because the intellectual doesn't stay with you when you're shaking in your car at midnight, wondering if you've wasted your life. But emotion raw, honest, bloody, knuckled emotion that lingers, that heals. But even as the gallery grew, even as press picked it up, even as partnerships were offered, I stayed quiet online. No flashy rebrands, no influencer tours. The art was the centre. Always, until one afternoon. Aria came rushing into the studio with her phone shaking in her hand. "You're trending," she said breathlessly. "Like, actually trending." I blinked. "What does that mean?" She turned the screen toward me. A video, a girl crying in front of one of our installations, titled "Grief Isn't Linear." Her caption said, "I haven't cried since my mum died." Today, I stood here and felt everything I didn't let myself feel. Thank you. It had 2 million views. By the next day, 10 more videos had gone up. People showing the gallery. The way it didn't feel like a gallery. The way it felt like a confessional. A sanctuary a mirror, and suddenly, everything changed. Requests poured in. Articles, interviews, podcasts, television. They wanted to hear from me. The girl they once ignored. The woman who used to stand in the shadows. I said no to most of them. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because I didn't build this for the spotlight. I built it for the light, the kind that reaches people in their darkest moments. Still, one offer came that I couldn't ignore. A documentary. Not about me, about the gallery, about the art, about the people who walked in one way and left another. We filmed quietly, over months. Real stories, real voices, no makeup, no performances, no rewrites. When the premiere was announced, my inbox filled with names that I hadn't seen in years. Jenna, Talia, even my father. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because this time, the story wasn't mine alone. It belonged to every single person who'd been laughed at, dismissed, told their pain wasn't palatable. Now, it was hanging on walls, in permanent ink, and the world was finally looking. The night of the documentary premiere, I almost didn't go. I stood in front of my closet for an hour, not because I cared what to wear, but because part of me still didn't believe this was happening. That girl from 5 years ago, the one who couldn't afford proper canvas, still lived somewhere under my skin. She whispered things like, "You'll mess this up. They'll know you don't belong. You're still just faking it." But then I looked down at my hands, not shaking, not hiding, just still. And I remembered these hands built something no one thought could exist. I chose a plain black dress. No designer tag, just clean lines, strong shoulders. It reminded me of who I'd become. Not fancy, not flashy, but unmistakably firm. The premiere was held at a modest theatre. No red carpet. That was intentional. I wanted the audience to walk in like they were entering a conversation, not a performance. Inside, the room was dim and warm. The documentary opened without music. Just a voice, soft, unsteady, saying, "I didn't think I mattered, until I saw my story on a wall." The film didn't show me much. I wasn't the focus. There were no montages of success, no how she made it narrative. Instead, it showed the gallery in motion. A woman touching a painting and crying. A father hugging his son after standing in front of a canvas titled Forgiven. At one point, Aria appeared on screen. Her voice trembled as she said, "Eva didn't fix me. She made a place where I didn't have to pretend I wasn't broken." I felt my chest tighten, not with pride, with recognition, because that was me, too, still is. Halfway through the screening, I noticed someone sitting 3 rows ahead of me. Talia, her shoulders slightly hunched, arms folded across her chest like a shield. I didn't expect her to come. I hadn't invited her. Next to her was Jenna. They weren't whispering, weren't scrolling, weren't scoffing. They were crying. When the lights came back on, the room stayed quiet. People didn't leap to their feet. They sat, processing, letting it settle. Then, one by one, they began to clap, slowly. Not the kind of clapping that's for show, but the kind that comes from the chest, from the gut. Afterward, in the lobby, people hugged strangers, talked to artists whose work they'd seen on screen. A woman approached me, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, eyes rimmed with tears. "My daughter," she said, her voice breaking. She almost gave up on painting. She thought no one wanted her stories. "I'm bringing her to your gallery next week. I nodded, unable to speak. Then I saw them. Talia and Jenna. Talia stepped forward first. Her eyes were puffy. No makeup. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Ever. I didn't know. I nodded. You didn't ask. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I really am. You built something beautiful. I looked at her. Really looked. For the first time in years. She wasn't cruel. Not inherently. Just careless. You don't owe me anything, I said. But if you want to make it right, listen more carefully from now on. She nodded. No excuses. No performative hug. Just a quiet, I hear you now. Jenna didn't speak. Just gave a small, respectful nod. It was the first time she hadn't filled the silence with something sharp. That meant more than an apology. That night, I walked home. No car, no entourage, just the sound of my heels on the pavement and the cool city air against my skin. The gallery wasn't just a space anymore. It had become a language, a translation of pain into presence. And me, I was no longer just Ava the painter. I was Ava the witness, Ava the builder, Ava the mirror. I didn't need to be understood anymore. I had created something that spoke louder than I ever could. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving the silence. I had turned it into art. The week after the documentary aired, things shifted in ways I didn't expect. Foot traffic to the gallery doubled, then tripled. Not just the curious or the art crowd, but people I never used to see in galleries at all. Nurses on night shift walking in at 10 a.m. with takeaway coffee, teenagers with sketchbooks and bitten nails, mothers holding children who pointed at the art and whispered questions. They didn't ask about prices. They didn't ask for artist bios. They just stood there, quietly, letting the walls speak. And I realised something I'd always suspected but never dared say out loud. Most people aren't looking to be impressed. They're looking to be understood. One afternoon, a man in his 60s came in. He had paint on his knuckles and a weariness in his eyes. He didn't say much, just walked to a piece by Cam, a digital image of a shattered clock, and stared. I watched him from behind the desk. After a long time, he approached me and said, I thought I missed my time. Maybe I didn't. Then he left. That night, I stayed late, alone, again. Just me and the soft buzz of the lights and the slow hum of my thoughts. I walked the gallery the way I used to walk my apartment after a bad day, touching things, rearranging, not to improve, but to feel in control. At the far end of the room was a new piece, Aria's latest. It wasn't pretty. In fact, it was brutal. Charcoal and red ink. Harsh lines. It looked like a scream. When she brought it in, she apologised. Said it might be too much. I told her it was honest. That was enough. Looking at it now, I saw something I hadn't seen before, a small gold thread running across the edge of the canvas. Barely visible. A whisper of hope stitched into chaos. And I thought, that's what we all are. Fracture and thread. Wreckage and stitch. The next day, I received a letter, not an email. A real, handwritten letter in a pale blue envelope. No return address. Inside was a single page. I came to your gallery last week. I didn't speak. I just stood. And for the first time since my sister died, I felt like I wasn't alone. Thank you for giving her grief somewhere to live. There was no signature. I cried, quietly, in the back office with the door closed, not out of sadness, but from the weight of being seen, not by the people who used to judge me, but by those who needed me before I even knew how to need myself. A few days later, Gabriel called. "I've been thinking." He said, "We should do something bigger. A travelling exhibit. Move the message beyond the walls." I didn't answer right away. My instinct was to hesitate. Growth scared me. Not because I didn't want it, but because I knew what it cost. I don't want it to become diluted. I said, or turned into something, easy. He paused. "Then make it hard. Make it real. We'll follow your lead." That night, I wrote the concept outline, titled it Unspoken. A collection of pieces that could move from city to city, featuring work that dealt with what people don't say out loud: loss, rage, shame, longing, no press tour, no art world elite, just stories, in brushstrokes and ink and thread. We launched the first leg of Unspoken in a borrowed space in Chicago. The line wrapped around the block. A man drove 6 hours from another state because his daughter had seen a clip online and whispered, "I think I'd feel better if I could go there." We built quiet rooms in the back of every location. Not lounges, not gift shops, just soft chairs, tea, tissues, journals, a place to process, a place to rest. And everywhere we went, people left notes on the walls. Some of them were confessions, some were apologies, some were just names, but all of them were proof that this mattered, that we mattered. A year passed, then another. And one day, I stood in the middle of a bright white space in a city I didn't live in, watching someone cry in front of inheritance. We had moved it. The first painting I'd ever shown, the one Eloise once hung by the janitor closet, was now the centerpiece of a national exhibition. I stood far back. They didn't know who I was. They didn't need to, because the art was speaking. And this time, the world was listening. The longer I did this, the more I realized revenge isn't loud. It doesn't come in courtroom speeches or triumphant entrances. It comes quietly, in the soft click of a gallery door closing behind someone who used to laugh at you, in the hush of a crowded room where your name is spoken with reverence instead of ridicule, in the complete absence of apology, because you don't need one anymore. I didn't think much about my old life, but sometimes the past found its way back in. One morning, as I walked into the main gallery space to prep for a student tour, a woman was already standing inside. Small frame, tan trench coat, expensive shoes. I didn't recognize her at first. Then she turned. My aunt, the one who used to tell everyone I was wasting my degree and who had proudly replaced my artwork with a framed diploma at our last family gathering. I stood still. She didn't smile. She didn't rush forward. She looked around slowly and said, "This is something." I waited. She glanced at a mixed media piece made from torn clothes and shattered glass. "Is this the one that was in the documentary?" I nodded. "Yes," titled Fault Lines. She didn't respond right away. Then, softly, "Your mother would have loved this place." That stopped me. Because she was right. My mother wouldn't have cared about the critics or the social media posts. She would have sat on the floor next to a crying teenager with a notebook full of poems and told her she mattered. She would have, I said, voice tight. My aunt turned to me. "I think I never understood what you were trying to do." I looked her in the eye. "You didn't try." She flinched. A small gesture, but it was honest. And for once, she didn't fight back. I came to say that I was wrong. She said, "You weren't lost. You were just ahead." I didn't forgive her. Not in that moment. Not out loud. But I let the silence stretch between us like a bridge, one she could choose to walk across, or not. She left without asking for a tour. I didn't need her to. Later that afternoon, I sat in the back room with Arya and Cam and a new intern named Malika, who just graduated from an arts program where no one ever showed her work. We were putting together the new theme for the next rotating exhibit, Letters Never Sent. Artists were asked to create something based on a message they never got the courage to send to a parent, an ex, a child, a friend, themselves. The submissions broke us open. One was a painting of a mailbox on fire. One was a silent video loop of someone erasing the same sentence over and over again. Another was a sculpture made entirely of broken pencils. Each piece felt like holding someone's breath. When the show opened, visitors left their own unsent letters in a box by the entrance. We'd planned to store them privately. Instead, they began pinning them to the walls. By the end of the month, an entire hallway was wallpapered in anonymous handwriting, messages to dead mothers, estranged daughters, past selves. It became our most visited exhibition. One letter read, "To the person I used to be, I'm sorry I doubted you. You were right all along." Another simply said, "I see you. I hear you. I'll never forget you again." I read them all, even the one that was folded 3 times and signed with a single initial, the same initial as my father's. I didn't know if it was his. Didn't matter, because what I built wasn't for him. It was for every person who ever whispered their truth into an empty room and wondered if anyone would answer back. Now, they had walls that spoke. I no longer chased revenge. I didn't even want justice anymore. I wanted visibility. I wanted reckoning. And most of all, I wanted redemption, not from others, but from myself. There are things I'll never say out loud. Not because I'm hiding, but because some truths are better painted than spoken. That's how I processed it. All those years, every betrayal, every silence, every time someone told me to be realistic, I poured it into brushstrokes, not paragraphs. Let it dry instead of scream. But lately, I'd been wondering if I owed it to the others, the ones still silenced, to finally say something out loud. That moment came sooner than I expected. We were invited to present Unspoken at a major art conference. Not the kind I ever imagined entering. This wasn't the underground shows or trauma-forward collectives I'd grown comfortable with. This was old money, big names, men in tailored suits talking about value per square foot. Gabriel was wary. "They're not your audience," he said. "I know," I replied, "but maybe they're the ones who need to hear it the most." So I went. The room was clean, sterile, rows of white chairs, bottled water lined up like soldiers, a backdrop of navy and chrome. The woman who introduced me pronounced the gallery name wrong, then smiled like we were friends. I stepped up to the podium. My hands weren't shaking. I looked out at the crowd, mostly grey suits, slicked back hair, a few curious expressions, many blank, and I said, when I was 23, I begged a gallery to show my work. They said it was too personal, too painful, too feminine. They hung it next to the janitor's closet, without a label, without light. Now, that same piece is touring 5 cities. People cry in front of it. Leave letters beneath it. Write poetry inspired by it, not because it's beautiful, but because it's honest. You don't have to like the work we show, but you can't look away from it. That's the difference. I paused. The room was still. Art isn't just aesthetics. It's survival. It's a woman painting her grief because she was never allowed to speak it. It's a man stitching his shame into fabric because he never learned to ask for help. It's children drawing monsters they don't yet have names for. You ask why our gallery is growing. It's because people are starving for something real. We give it to them, not because it's profitable, but because it's necessary. I stepped down. There was no applause, just silence, the good kind. Afterward, 2 men from a major collection group approached me. They wanted to talk funding, expansion, strategy. I listened politely, then told them we don't take money from institutions who have never featured a single Black, disabled, or trans artist in their permanent collections. They left quickly. That was fine. I wasn't there to network. I was there to name the wound. Back home, the gallery kept growing, not in size, in soul. The walls breathed now. Every artist left something behind. A piece of cloth, a single nail, a smudge of paint on the doorframe. We kept it all. One night, I stayed late. Again, alone. I walked into the oldest room, the original space, the one I'd scrubbed with my bare hands, the one that still smelled faintly of turpentine and lemon oil. There, in the corner, was a small envelope. No stamp, just tucked under the leg of a display table. I opened it. Inside was a postcard. It read, "You made something sacred out of what they tried to destroy. Thank you for not quitting." No name. Just those words. And suddenly, I thought about all the times I'd almost quit. After the hallway exhibition, after the rent bounced, after the messages from people I once loved that said, maybe it's time to grow up. But I didn't. I stayed. I painted. I believed. And now people stood in rooms I built with their hands over their hearts, whispering to strangers that they felt understood. You can't fake that. You can't buy that. You can only build it, piece by piece, until it's strong enough to hold someone else's truth. Sometimes I dream in brushstrokes. No words, just motion, texture, the feeling of something raw becoming real under my fingers. It's always quiet in the dream. No applause, no praise, just creation. That's how I know I'm still doing this for the right reasons. But the world isn't always quiet, and neither are the people in it. A few months after the art conference, a journalist reached out, a young woman named Lucy. Her message was different from the usual press emails. She didn't ask for numbers. She didn't ask for access. She just wrote, "I think I need your space more than your story. May I visit?" I said yes. She came on a Thursday, wore all black, no makeup, eyes tired but sharp. She walked the gallery slowly, notebook closed, hands in her pockets. When she stopped in front of Inheritance, I watched her from the desk. She didn't cry. She didn't take a photo. She just stood there, breathing like the air was thicker in that room. Later, she asked if we could talk. Not for an article. She said, just as 2 women who had survived the wrong kind of silence. We sat in the back, near the supply shelves and the crooked clock I still hadn't fixed. She told me about her sister, about a court case that never went anywhere, about how writing became the only way she didn't disappear. I told her about the winter I stopped speaking for 2 weeks, about the time I painted a self-portrait, then ripped it in half before anyone could see it, about the weight of watching others thrive while you wonder if your pain has value. We didn't hug, didn't take a selfie, just sat there in the hum of mutual recognition. She left a week later and wrote the piece anyway. Not about me, about the gallery, about how grief, when curated gently, becomes a form of love. It went viral in a way I didn't expect. not because it was flashy, but because it was real. After that, something shifted again. We started getting calls from hospitals, therapists, recovery centres. They wanted to bring clients, survivors, families. The gallery became more than a place for art. It became a place for reckoning. We created a new program called Quiet Hours. Private visits, no background music, no groups, just space to sit with what the art stirred up. We left notebooks on chairs. People wrote letters they never sent, drew things they couldn't say. One night, after a quiet hour, I found a page torn from one of those notebooks left on a bench. It read, "I thought my story ended the day he left." But then I stood in this room, and I realised I'm still here. So maybe my story is still being written. I kept that note. It sits in the drawer with the blue envelope, the unsigned postcard, and a photo of my first studio with mould on the walls and hope in the corners. And yet, not everything healed. There were still days I woke up hollow, still moments when I walked into the gallery and felt like an imposter. Success doesn't erase your past. It just gives it softer lighting. One morning, I received a package with no sender. Inside was a small canvas, a recreation of a piece I had painted over a decade ago and thrown away. I knew who had sent it before I even turned it over. My father. On the back, he had written, "I kept it, even after everything. I didn't understand it back then, but now I do." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call. I just hung the painting in the far back of the gallery, near the emergency exit. No label, no spotlight, just there, quietly existing, like forgiveness that doesn't need to be spoken. The next week, a woman stood in front of that piece for 20 minutes. She came to the front desk afterward and asked who painted it. I said, "Someone who never got the chance to say what they needed to say until now." She nodded. That's how it felt. Then she left, and I sat in the stillness of that moment for a long time. It's strange, isn't it, how the things we think are discarded sometimes come back, not to haunt us, but to remind us we lived through it, and we made something honest out of the mess. It was late autumn when the next shift arrived. Not dramatic, not public, but personal. The kind of change you only notice in the space between breaths. The gallery had found its rhythm. Artists came and went. Exhibitions opened and closed like chapters in a quiet novel. Our mailing list had grown into the thousands. We even had a waiting list for future shows. But something inside me had gone. Still, not empty, not numb, just still. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting to be seen. I wasn't proving anything. I wasn't defending my choices or justifying my work or explaining that yes, I do live off this. And no, I'm not going to eventually settle down and do something safer. I had finally reached a place I didn't think existed peace. And it scared me. Because chaos had been my fuel for so long. The doubt, the dismissal, the condescension. I painted in defense of myself. I curated as a rebuttal. I built a world they couldn't deny because I never stopped hearing their laughter in my mind. But now, there was silence, not absence, not failure, just no one left to prove wrong. I sat with that, and then I painted. For the first time in months, maybe a year, I picked up my brush not for an opening, not for an exhibit, not for a deadline, but for me. I didn't sketch first. I didn't plan. I just moved, colour over canvas, slow, wide strokes, pale blues, muffled reds, shapes that felt like memory, not statement. When it was done, I didn't name it. I didn't even sign it. I just leaned it against the wall in my apartment and looked at it in the morning light. It didn't ask to be seen. It just existed. And I realised this was what I'd been chasing all along. Not fame, not revenge, not even recognition, but wholeness. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't the girl at the back of the gallery hoping someone would glance her way. I was the woman who had built something that lived on its own, whether I was in the room or not. Around that time, I received an invitation. A museum in Europe wanted to include my work in an exhibition on women who created out of silence. Artists whose pain shaped movements, not just canvases. I read the email 3 times. Then I closed it and made tea, because it wasn't urgent anymore. I eventually said yes. Of course I did, but I didn't feel the rush I used to. The thrill of being asked, the panic of preparing, it felt natural, like a next step, not a final one. When the show opened in Amsterdam, I flew out alone. I walked through the halls of the museum, surrounded by the ghosts of women who had carved truth into oil and blood and fibre and ash. Some of them had never seen their work displayed in their lifetimes. Some had died before the world decided they were worth remembering. I stood in front of my peace inheritance again, now reframed and luminous beneath European light, and for the first time, I let myself feel what I had denied for so long. Pride, not for being right, but for surviving long enough to tell the story myself. After the exhibit, a curator approached me, soft-spoken, young. She looked nervous. "Your piece," she said. It made me call my sister. We hadn't spoken in years. I nodded, overwhelmed. She paused, then added, "I think art like this gives people permission." That word, permission, sat heavy in my chest for the rest of the trip, because I used to wait for it. From my family, from my teachers, from gallery owners and social norms and people who thought art was only valuable when it was easy to digest. Now, I didn't wait anymore. I gave it, and more importantly, so did the gallery, to every scared creator, to every grieving child, to every survivor who walked through our doors and finally let themselves feel permission. It was never theirs to give. It was always mine to claim. The return from Amsterdam was quiet, like coming home from a long dream. I didn't rush back into emails or meetings. I walked through the gallery before we reopened for the week, touching the walls like you might brush the shoulder of an old friend who stayed behind while you went off to see the world. I paused in the centre of the first room. It smelled faintly of linseed oil and paper familiar, grounding. This was still mine. But I wasn't the same woman who built it. Something had shifted. I didn't feel the ache to fill the space anymore. Not with noise. Not with newness. Not with ambition. It didn't mean I was done. Just different. I had created something that no longer needed my fingerprints on every surface. It could breathe without me. The gallery had become a living organism, shaped by the people who entered it, by their stories, their pain, their quiet healing. I was no longer at the centre. I was a root, not the bloom. And strangely, that felt more powerful than anything else I'd ever done. I sat down in my office, a small room tucked behind the back staircase, cluttered with sketchbooks, old exhibition plans, and chipped mugs of forgotten tea, and opened my journal. I wrote, What happens when you stop trying to be seen and start seeing? That question followed me through the following months. I started visiting other spaces, community centres, small, underfunded galleries tucked into forgotten neighbourhoods, places where art lived humbly, on folding tables and corkboard walls, but throbbed with truth. In one of those places, I met a girl named Zara, 17, barely 5 feet tall, with eyes that had already seen too much. She showed me a series of drawings ink on scraps of notebook paper. Her lines were sharp, her shading messy, but her stories, they were loud. I want to go to art school, she said, but we can't afford the portfolio classes. I looked her in the eye. You already have a portfolio. You just need someone to believe in it. A week later, I brought her to Inheritance, gave her a tour, let her sit in on a curatorial meeting. Her eyes never stopped moving, absorbing, cataloguing, before she left. I handed her a blank sketchbook. This space started because I was tired of asking. I told her. So I started building. You can too, she cried, not loudly. Just one tear, sliding down her cheek, like permission had finally landed in her hands. That night, I thought of how many Zaras there must be, girls on the edge of quitting because they thought no one would ever say, I see you. I decided to start a grant, a small fund. No bureaucracy, no stiff interviews or GPA requirements, just heart. If you could show me that your work came from a place of truth, I'd find a way to support you. We named it the Frame Project, because every story deserves one. Applications came fast. One was a poem painted onto a piece of driftwood. Another, a comic strip drawn by a deaf student whose school had never once displayed her work. And then there was the video 3 minutes of stop motion using matchsticks and cotton balls that told the story of a boy losing his grandmother and finding her again in colour. I wept watching it. We chose 10 artists that first year, gave them supplies, space, a platform, but more than that, we gave them what I never had at their age, the quiet assurance that they weren't wasting their time. The Frame Project became more than a fund. It became a new room in the gallery, permanent, the walls filled with rotating work from young, ignored, or first-time artists. People called it the heart of the gallery. I called it the echo, because it was my voice, passed on, not in lectures, but in action, in opportunity, in framing someone else's beginning the way no one had framed mine. And in that quiet corner of the world, I realised this was the revenge, not the headlines, not the speeches, not even the applause. It was legacy. It happened on an ordinary Thursday, rain tapping the skylights. The gallery mostly quiet, except for the sound of footsteps echoing through the sculpture room. I was in the back, sorting through portfolios candidates for the next letters never sent rotation, when Cam knocked on my office door. There's someone here, he said, voice careful. Asking for you. I wiped my hands on a rag and followed him out. The figure stood near muted applause, back straight, hands clasped. It was Eloise. I stopped, not out of fear, just surprise. She looked older, not in a bad way, just softened, like life had finally stopped being curated for her. She turned, and for a moment, it was just silence, the kind that used to hurt, but now simply meant space. I've been watching, she said, from a distance. The gallery, the work, you. I raised an eyebrow. Why, now I asked. She walked closer to the centre of the room. Her heels echoed like punctuation. Because I've lost count, she said, of the artists I dismissed. the talent I never nurtured. You were the first one who didn't come back to beg. I didn't respond. That part of me who used to crave her approval had died a quiet, merciful death a long time ago. I came to ask, she continued, if you'd consider consulting on a new project, an archive, documenting the artists we failed, giving them space to tell their side. I stood there, not sure whether to laugh or cry. Is this atonement? I asked. No, she said quickly. It's accountability, and I don't want to lead it. I want to listen. I nodded slowly. I'll think about it. She didn't press, just said, that's more than I expected, and left with the same quiet dignity she used to reserve for good reviews. Later that day, I walked the gallery alone, room by room. Aria was on a ladder hanging her newest piece of collage of hospital wristbands, stitched together with thread the colour of blood. In the frame room, Zara was sketching in her notebook, tongue between her teeth, utterly lost in her own world. Malika was updating the wall of unsent letters, gently pinning each one as if it were sacred. And it hit me all at once. This wasn't mine anymore. It was ours. It belonged to the girl who wrote, I miss who I used to be, and taped it to the mirror installation. It belonged to the man who visited every Sunday and just sat with his grief like it was his oldest friend. It belonged to the trans boy who brought his mum here and pointed to a sculpture and said, this is what I feel like. And she finally nodded. I wasn't the centre. I was the spark. I left early that evening, walked home under grey clouds and the faint rustle of the city exhaling. When I got home, I opened the closet and pulled out the coat I'd worn to that first gallery show, the one where Inheritance had been shoved in the dark, next to the janitor's closet. It still smelled like old wine and paint. I slipped it on, and then I walked into my studio. The original one. The one I never got rid of. Even when the money came, I kept it for nights like this. Nights when you need to remember what it was like before anyone believed you. The canvas was already waiting. Blank. Breathless. I stood in front of it, closed my eyes, and whispered to the silence, I'm not painting to be seen anymore. Then I began. One slow stroke. Then another. This one wasn't for a gallery. Not for a show. Not even for the frame project. It was for the girl I used to be. The one who cried in diners and painted in the cold and held onto a thread of hope so fragile it frayed every morning. This was her final letter. Not of goodbye, but of becoming. I finished the painting at sunrise. It wasn't large, just a modest 16x20 canvas, but it carried a weight that stretched far beyond its size. It wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense. It wasn't abstract or surreal or anything I'd been taught to admire in school. It was simple. A girl standing at the edge of an open field, hands stained with paint, looking not at the viewer but ahead, at something the viewer couldn't see. I didn't title it. I didn't need to. I let it sit on the easel, catching the early light. Then I made tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and sat on the floor beside it. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to explain anything. Not to the critics, not to the family who never understood, not even to the younger version of myself, who used to rehearse defences in the mirror at midnight. There was nothing left to prove. I had built the gallery they said I never would. I had changed lives, including my own. And somehow, the world had listened. But I didn't want applause. I wanted quiet. And I had finally found it. When I brought the painting to the gallery a few days later, I didn't tell anyone it was mine. I placed it in the frame room with a blank label and let it breathe among the other voices louder. Younger, hungrier, it blended in, and that felt right. That week, a little girl came into the gallery with her father. She couldn't have been more than 7, in polka-dot rain boots and a messy braid. She stopped in front of my painting and tugged at her dad's hand. "She's going somewhere," she said. Her father nodded. "Where do you think the girl tilted her head?" "Thought. Someplace good. She's not scared." They moved on, and I stood in the corner, hands in my coat pockets, letting the moment wash over me. Someplace good. She's not scared. That was the story now. Not pain, not revenge, not even triumph. Just freedom. A few days later, I received a letter in the gallery's mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single line on a torn scrap of paper. "You gave silence a home." I folded it gently, placed it in the drawer with the others, the postcards, the anonymous notes, the scraps of things people left behind when they didn't know where else to put them. And then, one evening, I stood at the entrance of the gallery after closing. The rooms were empty, the lights dimmed, the walls whispered their stories softly, still breathing with meaning even after the crowds had gone. I locked the door, stepped outside. The night air smelled like rain and leaves. I didn't turn to look back. I didn't need to, because what I'd created wasn't inside the walls anymore. It was everywhere. In every girl too scared to speak. In every artist who thought their truth was too heavy to hang. In every whisper of doubt transformed into a stroke of colour. And as I walked down the sidewalk quiet, alone, content, I heard one final voice in my mind. Not the ones who mocked me, not the ones who doubted me, not even the ones who hurt me. It was mine. Clear, steady, strong. "I'm not here for revenge," I whispered. "I just wanted the truth to be seen." And it was.